Hello everyone and welcome. I'm Jennifer and you are listening to the Ego Next Door podcast. Today, I will talk about recovery after narcissistic abuse and share more about my personal experience into healing from a long-term romantic relationship with a narcissist. If I'm here to open up the book, then it would only be fair to be as honest as possible, because I believe that sharing our stories can truly help and inspire. In fact, they did. Back in January 2020, after publishing my first piece of writing, I received hundreds of messages, literally hundreds. People of all ages telling me their stories of domestic violence, coercive control, and abuse, asking for advice and letting me know how my post is encouraging them to reinvent themselves. At the time, it was very overwhelming and powerful too, because I felt a load of responsibility to live up to the new narrative I had created and disclosed about myself. Yet I also felt encouraged to keep searching and finding myself. I will be real about this though. Healing and recovery is something that you have to do alone. There is just no way around that. There are going to be days when you feel like a newborn looking at everything for the first time. That will make you feel amazement, and sometimes it will also intimidate you. You will save yourself and no one will hold you. You are going to have days you will feel proud for pulling through it alone, and a lot of days where you will want to be saved. On those days, you are going to be so desperate for saving that you might end up having impulse behaviors that in hindsight will be embarrassing. But do not judge yourself. Some people call it depression shame. Others call it survivor's shame. But when you are trying to survive, your ability to function is compromised. Thus, your behaviors can often be unadjusted, and although extreme, they just might have been the things you had to do to get you to where you are today, alive. Moreover, when speaking of survivor's guilt or remorse in narcissistic abuse, evidence points to the recognition of two different things: the guilt of having adopted behaviors that felt off character in order to survive, and the guilt of having survived knowing that many people do not get that chance. One gets you thinking, why did I do that? Why did I say that? It's embarrassing to look back now. While the other one gets you thinking, why did I survive? Did I deserve to survive this? Why was I spared? But they both rely on the same concept: high expectations of yourself. Survivors often set expectations too high and believe that they must live up to them at all times. And sure, as much as it can be healthy to set expectations for ourselves because it is what drives us to set intentions and achieve goals, there is a fine line that separates balanced and realistic expectations that are purposeful in pursuing our desires and expectations that are found in rigidness and low self-esteem, thus leading to self-doubt and burnouts. J. Polivy calls the latter the false hope syndrome. So, to begin, the one thing we must remember is that whatever we have done in the past to help us cope and survive is something we should forgive ourselves for. If we are now able to acknowledge it, take responsibility for our actions, and be willing to make a change. Right after the breakup, I felt lost and alone. I felt so utterly helpless that I honestly did not know where to begin. I really wanted to find a book that could give me the instructions on healing, on rediscovering myself, on learning how to navigate a world where the person that I am focused on saving is myself and not someone else. I had spent so many years prioritizing another person and letting myself go that I had absolutely no idea how to take care of myself. I was quite unfamiliar with the term self-care, although I heard it everywhere on social media. Honestly, I even thought it was kind of bullshit. I could not think of a reality where I could find happiness on my own. I thought that the quote from the movie Into the Wild, "Happiness is only real when shared," was factual. But the thing that is lacking in this quote is that the first step is to find some sort of fulfillment within yourself to then share it. In other words, you must find purpose and joy in solitude, which will then be enhanced and feel more real when shared. And so, I went on a mission to find that purpose and joy. And like most rides in life, it was not an easy one. But looking back, it was an amazing one. I had spent close to a decade of my life in utter denial, unhappy, overwhelmed, and manipulated into believing that I wasn't deserving of the life I had imagined for myself when I was little. I watched people live the life I wanted, and part of me dramatically believed that I would only be able to live it if I were to die and reincarnate into someone else. Then I was released from that, and I thought relief and freedom would be all that I would ever feel. But I have always had a problem with the all-or-nothing mentality. In fact, the all-or-nothing mentality is a common and typical cognitive distortion in long-term trauma survivors. But it is absolutely normal to feel like sometimes you are regressing and going backwards in your healing. This is actually part of the journey. For example, in my case, I regressed a lot during the pandemic lockdown because I had to spend that time by myself and be confronted with a lot of other things that I had been avoiding during months right after the breakup. But this confrontation of facts also pushed me into getting psychological help, which was a big step towards recovery for me. Through that time, I started reading a lot of books on psychology and pretty much any book that my therapist would recommend. Through this, I learned that healing is not a destination. Healing is the journey. While this might sound discouraging, it is the truth. In life, we carry little pieces of each of our experiences, good and bad, and we must learn how to navigate the world looking at it through new lenses. We can learn to cope with our trauma, and learning how to do it in a healthy way will make us adopt healthy coping strategies as opposed to maladaptive coping strategies, as explained in episode 8. This is the advice that I wish someone had given me, especially because in my case, there was a 1.5 year gap between the breakup and me actually starting therapy. This made things even more difficult because I used a lot of maladaptive coping mechanisms to deal with everything that had happened. 1 month after the breakup, I was starting my Ph.D, and a month after that, my grandmother, the most important person in my life, tragically passed away. So, a 1.5 years later, there was a lot to unpack. Right after the breakup, I felt like I was dying. I felt so lost because I had so many of my realities intertwined with this one person that had made sure that all my bridges led to him and that they would burn down without him. At first, no one believed my story. In fact, people immediately took his side. So I stayed quiet. I didn't tell anyone what happened. People were quick to take his side, and I thought that there was something wrong with me, that maybe I was the problem, because people around us were even supportive of his cheating on me and pursuing this new relationship publicly only weeks after we ended things. That was short-lived though. A while later, some mutual friends of ours told me that they had always noticed how abusive he was. Their excuse to not intervene is that they didn't want to get involved because I was way in too deep. I found that ironic and sad. So how are victims supposed to leave if there is no one giving them an out? This made me realize why so many victims don't survive, and why so many survivors are ashamed of their story. After suffering and being emotionally neglected for so long, I found myself so vulnerable and falling in love so easily with anyone who treated me with a basic amount of respect. So, for a long while, I thought that if someone was being nice to me, it was because I had something they wanted or needed, whether that be love or something else. It took me years to understand that people being nice does not need to have a reasoning, just like people being mean does not need to have a reasoning. People's actions say more about them than they do about us, I later learned. This is an important realization in order to find peace after darkness. And so, when we are so used to being mistreated, anything that doesn't include mistreatment can feel like heaven, and it can make us crave it more and more, like a drug. This is called codependency. First mentioned in episode 14, codependency is known as relationship addiction. Where there is codependency, there are things such as lack of autonomy, blurred boundaries, and loss of individual identity. This is very dangerous. Being found in such a vulnerable state during one's healing process makes people the ideal target for control, prone into falling into traps and being lured in by someone or something that offers answers and solace to their pain. Many people who get into coercive control relationship dynamics get targeted when undergoing periods of depression and confusion with a sense that life is meaningless. For example, this is how cults recruit many of their members. They identify potentially vulnerable prey, gain access by detecting fragilities, which helps them understand what rewards to promise, infiltrating their lives through grooming, easily isolating them to gain control, and maintaining control through any means necessary. And this is why it is so important to keep to ourselves and try to find answers on our own. Because the answers to our questions are already within ourselves. This is the entire premise of therapy, receiving guidance, support, and resources to access our inner insights and strengths in order to navigate life. And as painful as it can also be very rewarding because it is through this that we get into the next phase of healing, empowerment. On the next episode, we will be discussing recovery, the meaning of enmeshment and codependency, and how to reclaim our identity after coercive control. Thank you for listening to the Ego Next Door podcast. See you soon, and I hope you have a wonderful day. If you enjoyed today's episode and would like to hear more, don't forget to like and subscribe to my YouTube channel at Ego Next Door. And if you would like to support my work, consider becoming a patron to my Patreon creator page at Jennifer Hachia. The Ego Next Door podcast is presented solely for informational, educational, and entertainment purposes. The content here is not intended to serve as a substitute for the consultation, diagnosis, or medical treatment of a qualified healthcare provider. Reliance on any information provided here is at your own risk. If you or someone you know is in crisis or experiencing suicidal thoughts, please reach out immediately to someone who can help right away. Call your national emergency services or go to the nearest hospital.